For the Lord grants wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He grants a treasure of common sense to the honest. He's a shield to those who walk with integrity. He guards the paths of the just and protects those who are faithful to him. Then you will understand what is right, just, and fair, and you will find the right way to go. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will fill you with joy. Wise planning will watch over you, understanding will keep you safe, wisdom will save you from evil people, from those whose words are twisted. My child, don't lose sight of common sense and discernment. Hang on to them, for they will refresh your soul. They are like jewels on a necklace. They keep you safe on your way, and your feet will not stumble. You can go to bed without fear, and you will lie down and sleep soundly. You need not be afraid of sudden disaster or the destruction that comes from the wicked, for the Lord is your security. He will keep your foot from being caught in a trap.
Hello and welcome to The Journey Back. My name is Ruben Neverett, and I have with me Tri Robinson, and we're good old friends that like to talk about things that are affecting us as believers, things that are affecting the church, and how we're living through life during this time coming out of pandemic. And you just heard these passages out of Proverbs, which talk a lot about having wisdom and having peace. And I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation today as we're talking about having vision for your life and having priorities and having purpose. And I think that why it's going to be a great conversation for me is because the whole reason why you and I know each other is because I've always admired just your lifestyle of just way back from 30 years ago, just observing how you lived and in such a sustainable way, and how you had a ranch that was off the grid. And it always just was so interesting to me. We're just coming out of the pandemic now. People have really had to strip their lives back in a lot of ways. And we're looking out at this common term that people are using, this new normal. And so it really sets us up for, a new tomorrow. So tell me a little bit about just your lifestyle. What in the beginning made you decide to live this, in a sustainable way? Because I know it's not something that you just came up with in the last few years. I know it's been a lifestyle for you. So Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, really, Nancy and I just had our 50th wedding anniversary about 6 months ago. And, we started talking about how we were going to live as a married couple back in the days of College of Idaho, before we even ended up on the family ranch, which was off the grid, spring-fed water, living in a very natural way. And so we were just a young couple that had a dream, and we just pursued a dream. In fact, pretty much our whole life, everything we've invested has really been in living that lifestyle that we ultimately felt that the Lord had called us to, which was a very sustainable lifestyle, which wasn't just being a hippie living off the land, because it was way more than that. It was really living a purposeful life that is sustainable, that was actually biblically based and spiritually based.
But what was the impetus of that? I mean, what age were you when you decided that was a lifestyle that you wanted to pursue?
We moved on my old family ranch in the early 1970s. And of course, that was kind of the end of the Jesus movement, which we ended up getting caught up in, and gave our life to Christ in those days. So we kind of matched these two things. And, one of the things that was really the conversation of that time, and so much teaching, so much focus, was about eschatology, or the study of the last days. And one of the things that it was talking about was that, life was going to get a little tougher, in the future. And there were going to be major challenges coming. There was, as we're saying today, there was going to become a new normal. And one of these things of the Proverbs that we just read was talked about wise planning and understanding and depending on the Lord. And so in a sense, I think we wanted to live a prophetic life, not the fact that we were the prophets, but the fact that we were responding to end time prophecy and that we would base our life a little bit. I saw other people say, "Oh, read all that and get all worried about it, but then do nothing about it." And it wasn't like, because I've never been a prepper or anything like that. I just wanted to live more with nature and less dependent, really, on a world that was getting rapidly more out of control. And so we went to more of an agricultural lifestyle where we raised pretty much all of our own food and lived this natural life. And we found that we loved nature. We loved the solitude. We loved how God was reacting to us kind of in the garden, in a sense.
Right.
And
That's such a contrast between, what it means to be a prepper and somebody who lives a sustainable life, because I always felt that preppers, and I wouldn't say this across the board, but it's a little more fear-based. When you're prepping, you're buying food that you'll never really eat. It's only you'll eat in desperate times. I know that when this pandemic started to happen and there was quite a bit of fear, even I started getting concerned. And one of the things that I did is I ran to Costco and, just kind of randomly bought a bunch of stuff, and I bought some prepping food, that stuff that comes in the big tubs. And it was, I started looking at it and I'm like, we're never going to eat this stuff. I mean, even in hard times, this will be the last resort. I ended up just taking it back because I thought, yeah, this isn't, this is not based in any kind of great, motivation. But you, on the other hand, you're not at all a prepper. I don't think you have any of that dried kind of food that you have, but maybe
we do, because we dry it ourselves.
Right.
We have a root cellar. We even make our own wine. Everything we do. When the pandemic hit, it didn't even affect Nancy and I. We've never had to leave the ranch, really, except for an occasional trip for some things. And that was mainly because we had cattle and other things that we had to take care of. But, I learned a huge lesson in Katrina, when Katrina happened. Now, I forget what year that was. It was quite a long time ago. It was 2000, early 2000s anyway. And anyway, my son Brooke and I, once Katrina happened, it was so catastrophic and it was so unusual to have a hurricane of that magnitude wipe out someplace like New Orleans. And it was on the news constantly, 24/7, and so my son Brooke and I, we jumped on an airplane, we flew down and kind of almost literally snuck into New Orleans because the National Guard was there keeping people out. We took a bunch of supplies into a food bank. And the thing I learned there was that people who had actually had some wise planning, as it said here in Proverbs, survived really well. But the people that didn't didn't know what to do with themselves. If people had boarded, they already had pre-cut pieces of plywood for their windows. They had a generator to back up. Everybody that didn't lost for one thing, their refrigerator. They couldn't run shop vacs or pumps, or they couldn't. These people, some of them had tarps for their roof. They knew they'd lose shingles, and literally they just went on with life. And I realized Katrina seemed like an anomaly that would never happen again. And yet it just started happening one after another. And then the tornadoes and then the wildfires and all this climate crisis started happening, like Texas just happened. And people are still unprepared, many people, and so that was a big lesson. I just said, I'm not going to be like that.
Right. In that passage out of Proverbs 3 that was read at the top of the program, it said, "My child, do not lose sight of common sense." I like that. "And discernment, and hang on to them." And then later on, it says, "You can go to bed without fear, and you will lie down and sleep soundly. You need not be afraid of sudden disaster or the destruction that comes upon the wicked." And I just think that is so smart, to be prepared in a way that's not out of paranoia, but just out of wisdom, just having, some things in place, just that are smart.
It's just wise, and I think that things are not, the new normal is not going to get better in that regard. It's going to get worse. And so I want to be prepared for it. Like here, we have real threat of huge range fires that come through here. I have a fire truck, and who else does that? But on the other hand, we've already used it once, Nancy and I, and saved this place. And, and so it's just wisdom, and it's thinking, prophetically thinking, I think, ahead and saying, what could affect my family that I could, live more sustainably. I read a book during that time called Small Footprint, Big Handprint. And then the tagline was, I forget, living more sustainably with less so that you can love more extravagantly and be in a position where you can actually love others, your neighbors better, be in a position. In other words, if crisis comes, you're not in a position of need. You're in a position where you can actually reach out and help other people, And the idea was, I want to downsize my life so that I can upsize my impact on the kingdom and on the world around me. And,
right. So what advice would you give to somebody, like me? I'm middle-aged and maybe a little bit beyond middle age, or quite a bit beyond middle age now. But, I've got a family, I got a house, I got a mortgage, I got a job, I'm busy. What would you give advice to people who are just like who maybe didn't have a grand vision to live sustainably, an hour outside of town on 40 acres, but are living life down here? I mean, what?
When I was pastoring, I challenged the church to, grow vegetable gardens in their extra space if they had it, and I got so many people in the church. Well, I also challenged them to get out of debt, which is downsize your life, have a huge garage sale and give the money to people in need, and so just get rid of the clutter in your life. And I also would challenge people to have actual vision for their life, like a plan that would lead to an actual strategic plan to live more wisely at a time like this, the other thing, there was a passage in Ephesians 4 that wouldn't make sense to a lot of people, but to me, it made a lot of sense. And see, this is a philosophical, not just a theological, but a philosophical tweak of thinking. But Paul said this: anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. Now, that's not just a good idea,
So I've got to give up my shoplifting. I've been, going to Walmart, sticking stuff in my.
Yeah. See, I know that's what people think that is, right. But see, philosophically, I feel that, especially with the American lifestyle, there is this concept that still is with us from the very beginning called manifest destiny. And manifest destiny was an idea that said God gave us this land for us. It was kind of an entitlement issue. In other words, all the buffalo, we could shoot them, all the beaver we could trap, because it was for us to prosper. So this prosperity sort of doctrine of living came into the American lifestyle. And in a way, to me, the thing the Lord spoke to me is that when you take from this earth things that you really don't need, more than you need, you're stealing from future generations. It was stealing. And people, I don't think a lot of people think like that. So I wanted this idea that Nancy and I and our family would actually try to produce a lifestyle and even a home that would give back. Now, not just give back to others in need, but give back to nature as well. In other words, we'd leave this land better than we found it. And so that was sort of the driving force through a lot of this. Is I saw that as not just it was a new ideology of living, of not having that sense of entitlement that I'm just going to get what I can have. I'll drive any car I want because I can afford the fuel that it takes, but not thinking that fuel is going to support future generations. And it's not a renewable source of energy. When it's gone, and it is, and it's if people want to admit it or not, it's going. So therefore I put solar on my home. We started doing things, that was taking less from future generations.
Huh. That's interesting. What year did you publish that book? Do you remember?
I don't. It was probably 2005 or 8 or in there.
Is it still available on Amazon?
Honestly, it's not the best book that I've written, but the
Well, I mean, I
concept.
told you that when you wrote it, but you didn't listen
Yeah,
to me.
it was based on a series I actually preached.
Yeah.
It was a 7-part series I preached in those days, and the concept I thought was excellent because it did cause people to rethink their mortgages and use all their money to buy a boat they didn't need or whatever it was, and make their life more focused, that they might be in a position not just to save themselves a lot of agony and trouble, but also help out their neighbors and be more of a Christian in a sense of lifestyle.
What kind of feedback do you get from people who visit you? I know you told me a story recently of some young people coming up there, and what kind of feedback do you get to people who kind of encounter your lifestyle for the first time?
They admire it, and it challenges them. They've just, it's just a lot of people think it's impossible. Like, how could I have this much land in this day and age and stuff like that? But Nancy and I started this 50 years ago. And I would say this especially to young couples who are just starting out. And like I was saying to you another time, most of our resources and even vacation time was invested in our vision for life. So we didn't take extravagant vacations and spend money on big cars and other things. We focused because we had a vision, we had a plan, and we worked the plan, and we still have, and now our kids are working it with us. So we kind of passed that value down a bit.
So So tell me a little bit about that, because I know Brooke works with you quite a bit up there. So what gave you the idea to start planting your own vineyard and making your own wine?
Yeah, that's not something I would have done,
Oh, really? Okay. So that wasn't.
No, but my kids liked it. I think they're a different generation. They had they just had a dream that would be a good thing to have on a sustainable farmstead because it could produce income as well as wine. And so I'm the vintner primarily. Nancy and I are the vintners. Like, we just pruned everything up here, to get ready, because that's a big job every year. It's a lot of work. And the kids come up, and they're the winemakers primarily, because there's a lot of work in that, especially if you're making real wine, real good quality wine. And so I don't know. I basically did it because it was part of their vision. They were adding to the vision, and it was kind of more a generational thing, I think, because we also have cattle, and we have sheep, and we have poultry, and we, have grazing that we cross fence so that we don't overgraze anything. And there's a big plan here. Water's a big one, and I think there's really 2 huge issues that the world is going to be facing, if they want to believe it or not. And the United States is already facing. We see it right now in the crisis that's going on in Texas right now. They weren't expecting this big freeze to come down there. They were totally unprepared for it. They lost cattle. There lots of calves and babies couldn't sustain those cold temperatures because they weren't used to it. It just hit them blindside. Their electric grid went down, and the big issue was water. But so the 2 big things are food and water. I think that we've seen this pandemic, but I think mainly because of a lot of the crisis that's coming through climate. And that's one of the reasons that we're seeing so much immigration, especially from south coming to north, is food production. And is getting difficult in certain areas of the world. And so it's forcing people to move around, one of the reasons. And so I think that people need to think about food and water. And like you said, prepping is not the answer. Figuring out how to create a more sustainable food source and water source, which is something we really work at up here, is essential for the future, especially. So
I find it really it's kind of a scary thing for people who live in large urban areas. In Idaho, we're fortunate that we, have more rivers than any, state in the union. But there's states that, where the public is really, really dependent upon the government and the public water system. And that is, I think, a vulnerable place to be.
Yeah, and one of the reasons, for example, that I'm so anti-fracking is because of the threat it has to even Idaho water, for example, groundwater. It's scary, and we can't do anything to jeopardize our water source and take that for granted, because it's water is going to be more important than gold, or oil, in even now but in the future especially.
Wow. Well, really good discussion. How would you close out this session today?
I've always kind of referred to myself tongue in cheek as a Protestant monk, and there's two things there. One is monks used to work the land, and they worked hard. They really followed this passage from Ephesians 4. They were hard workers and did a lot of work with their hands, so that they could help those in need. So I think we need to think about other people because of what we're doing on the earth right now. And I think that the other thing is that we need to really tap in and live more prophetic, spiritually in tuned lives. And I think one of the things that I see when I'm out pruning my vineyard or building a rock wall, something monks did, a lot of, is that God speaks to me there more powerfully sometimes than if I'm just, sitting in a chair with a cup of coffee and, or with my Bible, and so I think if I was to challenge people, I'd say, read these two passages a few times through, meditate on them, and say, how does that apply to my life? And am I following this incredibly wise counsel for the new normal that we are entering? Have a vision for your life, have a vision for your life. And if you're married, have a shared vision for your life. That's one thing that I so value, is the fact that Nancy and I are completely on the same page.
Wow, that's awesome. That's great. Tri, it's been it's been inspiring for me to just our friendship. You've always encouraged me. I know years ago, Carrie and I went, and we were broke at the time. This was probably in around, I don't know, this was not long after September 11th, and the country was reeling, and her and I, we came close to losing our business, and we had to go out and just get, low paying jobs. And I remember we were sitting out on the patio one day, and we said, let's come up with some things in our life. Where do we want to be in 20 years? And it was at a time when we were kind of taken down to the bare bones, and down to the studs in our life, financially in every way. And I made a long list of the things and where I wanted things that I wanted to see happen in our lives. And then we moved on from that. Life moved forward, and years later, was probably at least 10 years later, I was cleaning out a bookshelf, and I found that little journal, and I looked through that, and I had written down all of these things, and more than half of them had transpired. And I thought, wow, the power of just, stopping and considering it, talking through it as a couple, writing it down, and then actually, moving in that direction. I think the first step is sometimes just, slowing down. And I think one of the things about the pandemic that's been helpful is it's slowed everybody down. And Carrie and I have thought a lot about this. We're like, do we really even want to go back to a new normal? I don't want the old normal. And there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of value that we, encountered in a life that was stripped down of all of the extra events and all of the extra, things that we went to. I remember just shortly before the pandemic hit, we went to a dinner and we saw friends there. And then we went to this art auction, and there were 200 people there. And then the pandemic hit, and that was the last time we ever went to a crowd. But I don't miss that. I don't miss going to all of that stuff and all of that busy time away from our family. And so now is a great time, I think, for people who are listening to this to take a step and ask yourself, what do you really want to put back into your life, and what do you want, to stay out of your life that you've lost? So I think that's a great exercise.
And I think that this whole thing is about the journey back, like back to biblical truth, but not back to the old normal.
Yeah.
We're never going back to Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet, family, father knows best. I mean, those
Right.
days are behind us. They were wholesome and they were wonderful, but they were in the 50s,
Right.
and we're not going back to that. We have a different world we're living in. We have to think future. Where is
Yeah.
this going? And the Bible tells us. So it's like going back to Bible prophecy in some regards, and then taking it serious and kind of work your life around it.
Yeah, gosh, so good. Well, what an interesting topic. Well, Tri, thank you so much. And thank you everyone who's been joining us on these conversations. This is our 9th conversation, so we've really enjoyed them. Please, if you get an opportunity, go visit us at patreon.com and pledge your support. It's patreon.com/the journey back. We'll add the link into our social media channels. And please make sure that you comment and participate in the discussion. Tell us a little bit about your vision for your life and what you're going to do, and how you plan on moving forward. And also, we really encourage you to share these videos and share these discussions with your friends and family, and hopefully they'll gain some insight out of this as well. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.